Skid Row would emerge in 1989 with the release of their 5 times platinum self-titled debut record. They'd be led by wild and unpredictable frontman Sebastian Bach, and the band wasn't just in the news for their music, but also Bach's antics and behavior, much to the chagrin of his bandmates. It would eventually lead to the band falling apart by the mid-90s, and in today's video, let's take a look at their final record together with Bach, the often overlooked Subhuman Race, an album that showed just how much the music industry had changed in just a few short years. Formed in 1986 in New Jersey by bassist Rachel Bolan and guitarist Dave "Snake" Sabo, the musicians soon recruited 2 other like-minded people in guitarist Scotty Hill and drummer Rob Affuso. They would end up finding them through newspaper ads. Vocalist Sebastian Bach would join the group in 1987, replacing original frontman Matt Fallon. Sabo knew rocker Jon Bon Jovi since they were teenagers, with the pair agreeing that whoever made it big first in the music business would help the other one out. Bon Jovi, of course, blew up first and helped Skid Row, and the band soon nabbed a recording deal with Atlantic Records. They would release their self-titled debut record in 1989 that went 5 times platinum, producing a string of hits with 18 in Life, Youth Gone Wild, and I Remember You. The band would end up signing a publishing deal with Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora, diverting a good deal of their royalties to the pair. It would prove to be a sticking point for the band later on in their career. Skid Row would return in 1991 with their second record, Slave to the Grind, which surprisingly debuted at the #1 spot on the Billboard album chart. The band would spend the next 22 months on the road supporting that record, and they would finally come off the road in early 1993 and took some much-needed time off. Bach would remark in his book 18 in Life how success had changed the band for the worst, resulting in them living separate lives and not spending as much time together. For Bach's bandmates, though, his ego and behavior became too much to control, while Bach would claim his bandmates were jealous of the attention he was receiving. Bassist Rachel Bolan would remark the louder sound, "As our career progressed, pretty much all the shit that Sebastian said on stage became irritating. He'd tell an audience what a song was about, but it had nothing to do with the lyrics I'd written. Unless I ignored it, I'd have walked off." Couple this with a few serious incidents, including Bach injuring a female fan when he threw a bottle hurled up on stage into the crowd at a 1989 gig, or the time he was photographed wearing a homophobic shirt backstage. Actions like these only further divided the band, and when you add drugs into the mix, it was a pretty combustible situation. When Skid Row tried to reassemble in 1993 in their New Jersey rehearsal space, they struggled as Bolan was suffering from writer's block. It wasn't until a year and a half later, in July of 1994, a Tampa Bay radio station asked the band to do a show for them. Skid Row finally had the shot in the arm they needed, and they started digging in and writing new material. It was following that show in Tampa, the band returned home and spent the next 2 months finishing up the songs that would appear on their third record, Subhuman Race. Skid Row would opt to work with a new producer this time around, ditching longtime producer Michael Wagner, instead enlisting Motley Crue and Metallica producer Bob Rock. Bach would remark to the Toronto Star, "Michael Wagner is a very structured guy, but for this one, we knew we were going to wing it, so we wanted a producer with a similar approach." They would also cite Rock's work on Dr. Feelgood as being one of the main reasons they chose the producer. But the members years later, despite their differences, they would collectively agree they weren't happy with how Subhuman Race sounded, blaming Bob Rock. Bach would tell an interviewer in 2018 that the album sounded, and I quote, "very odd and dated," adding, "I read a totally hilarious internet thread that put forth the proposition that Subhuman Race was the first record to debut Bob Rock's horrible snare sound that ended up on Metallica's Saint Anger." Bach would go on to add that once the band got to Vancouver to begin recording the record in 1994, Rock was working with a lot more alternative groups, and that seeped into how Subhuman Race sounded. He would also remark how Rock told him to sing more like Scott Weiland and scream less. Bolan, meanwhile, called the recording of Subhuman Race, and I quote, "a nightmare," adding, "internally the band had fallen apart, but we were forced to go in and do another record. The record absolutely sucks. Sabo would cite Bach's push to be more involved in the songwriting as fueling further discontent in the group, telling Louder Sound, "Rachel and I had been learning our craft for 11 years. Sebastian could sing 18 in Life way better than I ever could. But writing a song like that isn't something you can just snap your fingers and learn. When that distinction got lost, that's when the real troubles began." Now, if you go back and read a lot of the headlines that were written around the time of Subhuman Race coming out, they always asked whether the type of music that Skid Row was playing was relevant given a changing music industry, citing the popularity, of course, of alternative and pop punk groups. The same was also even true for their own hometown papers in New Jersey. In fact, an article from the Asbury Park Press had the author telling a friend that he was interviewing Skid Row, to which the friend responded, "Aren't those guys broken up or dead?" Subhuman Race would strike a theme of how society by the mid-90s celebrated victimization while the real victims of history were often ignored, with Sabo telling the Great Falls Tribune the idea was Rachel's. He was talking about how badly the Native Americans have been treated, with Bolin adding, "All these figures in American history who are supposed to be heroes are the same people who were responsible for the slaughter of legions of Indians. Maybe that's why I never paid attention in history class." The album would also tackle the subjects of addiction, discrimination, as well as self-reliance. Subhuman Race would be released on March 28, 1995, and despite a lack of radio and MTV support, it still resulted in the band having a decent debut, with the album charting at number 35 in America, with about 70,000 copies sold in its first week of release. The only charting single in the States would be the song Into Another, which would peak at number 28 on the mainstream. The album was said to have been influenced by grunge and alternative rock, as well as groove metal. While Rolling Stone and the LA Times, as well as People magazine, gave the record good reviews, MTV largely gave the band a cold shoulder, with Sabo telling the Idaho Statesman, "They've all but abandoned hard rock. MTV used to set trends, now they follow them, and alternative music is the most commercial music out there." In just a few short years, Skid Row went from being the darlings of MTV, being prominently featured on Dial MTV and Headbangers Ball, to now being ignored, while groups like Bush, Live, and Hole were the new kids in town. Then came the tour. Skid Row would nab a premier spot, opening for Van Halen in 1995. While the band still maintained a good deal of popularity in Europe and Asia, once they started headlining their own shows in America, it became abundantly clear how far the band had fallen in popularity, with Bach stating in his book, "We attempted to headline in America with disastrous results, pulling into 4,000-seat arenas in the Midwest to play for less than 1,000 people, something that no band ever wants to see happen." Bach would also remark how it was on that tour he started to have trouble sleeping, perhaps due to his father being diagnosed with leukemia and bone marrow cancer. Adding, "I also could not deny another dying member of my family. Skid Row was on life support as much as anyone with a terminal diagnosis. No wonder I couldn't sleep." Spin Magazine did a really great piece on Skid Row and a number of other bands when it came to the state of metal in 1996. The article would really shed light on how things had changed for the band in just a few short years. Despite the fact that they were opening for Van Halen in America for part of that tour cycle, their touring crew was limited to just 7 people, all of which slept in the same tour bus as the members. One of the band members would be quoted as telling Spin, "There would have been 3 limos back in the old days. Now we're relying on hotel shuttle buses to take us to the gig." Those old days of carrying road cases full of makeup, mirrors, and leather pants were also gone for Skid Row. The band was now wearing baggy shirts and shorts on stage. You also had big labels like Warner Brothers and Columbia phasing out their metal departments. MTV got rid of Headbangers Ball by 1995, and metal radio station KNAC in Los Angeles would switch their format to Spanish music. Skid Row's change in sound and appearance by the time of their third record. Bach didn't count himself a fan of alternative rock at the time, taking aim at groups like Hole, Nirvana, criticizing their drug abuse, going on to say, "We don't cancel shows in this band." He would call alternative and grunge, and I quote, "revenge of the college people. They hated all of us rockers in high school because we got all the chicks. Then they took over MTV and no rockers allowed." By 1996, Skid Row played their final show, which would be a musical festival in Brazil, sharing the bill with Iron Maiden, King Diamond, Merciful Fate, and Motorhead. By Bach's own admission, the Brazilian crowd had no use for Skid Row and they weren't well received. As far as the frontman was concerned though, he had no clue he had just played his final show with the band. It was upon returning to the States, the members of Skid Row, apart from Bach, knew it was over. With Bolan reflecting the louder sound, I knew when I got off the plane at JFK Airport that I'd never step on stage with Skid Row again. By then we were viewed as a cartoon band, and the genre we were lumped into had been swallowed up and laughed at. By 1996, Subhuman Race had sold about 150,000 copies. The final days with Bach and the group came during Kiss's 1996-1997 reunion. Bach and Bolan attended a few of the shows in New York City in the summer of '96. During this time, Bach and Bolan got into a verbal argument over why they never hung out anymore, why they haven't written any new music, and why Bolan never returns Bach's calls. It was around this period of time Bolan had started a side project featuring members of Skid Row's road crew, which incensed Bach, who thought that the band should get back together, record, and play some more shows. Then Skid Row were offered the chance of a lifetime, at least to Bach, to open a New Year's Eve show in 1996 for Kiss at the Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey. Bach would hear from the band's camp that Rachel was too busy with his side project, making it impossible to do the gig. The wheels finally came off 2 days before Christmas in 1996 when Skid Row fired Bach over the phone. Bolan would tell the Chuck Shoot podcast, things were pretty bad within the band, with all of us actually. We never heard from each other when we were home, and most of us lived 15 minutes from each other's house. And it started to get not fun at one point because it was just all bullshit that was going on with preparing to do stuff. With Bolan unable to do the gig for Kiss and the rest of Bach's bandmates claiming they were too big to open for the band, Bach would end up leaving an angry voicemail for Sabo on his answering machine. Scotty Hill would recall to an interviewer, "This caused a giant uproar is what it did, and Sebastian did something to Snake that was unacceptable. He called his house on Thanksgiving and said some horrible things into his answering machine, and Snake says, you know what, I'm not going to be in a band with you anymore. There you go, it's as simple as that." Bach would reveal years later in an interview to absolutely legendary rock interviews that it wasn't just the disagreement over opening for Kiss that resulted in him getting fired from the band, but also his desire to write more of the band's music, adding, "I thought we should be doing material that stands next to Youth Gone Wild or In a Darkened Room, not stuff that was okay. They sent me some music and I told them straight up that I didn't like it, and I wanted us to write some more because I wasn't going to sing these songs." Skid Row has supposedly been asked to reunite a number of times with some big money behind the offers. Bach would claim in his book, the only thing really stopping the members from reuniting is publishing, which is where the money is at. He would remark that how when they were working on the band's first album, he would rewrite melodies to suit his vocal range, and he regrets not asking for co-writing credits, not really understanding the monetary implications of his actions. As for Subhuman Race, Bach would refer to it as Skid Row's Saint Anger. That does it for today's video, guys. Let me know your thoughts on the album, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.